One of my absolute favourite players is Alireza Firouzja. He's the most talented youngster in the world in my opinion, and the ratings speak for themselves on that one. And anytime he sits down to play Magnus Carlsen, there's this added spice, because as we've seen recently, Magnus does not like the youngsters nipping at his heels. So I'm taking a look back here at the first game that these guys ever played. I believe it's the first anyway, at least official game in chessgames.com. It's the 2018 World Blitz Championship. Magnus has white, Alireza black. Let's see what happens in this brilliant 32 move decisive game. So Carlsen kicks off with pawn c4 here, the English opening. Now we had g6 from Alireza, pawn to g3, bishop g7 fianchettoing, and Alireza loved to play the King's Indian defence in his early days. He still does, I'm sure, but at the top level it tends to get crushed, so you don't see it so often played by the top guys. Now bishop's g2 from Magnus, knight f6, knight c3, castles played, knight f3, and after d6, d4, we reach this standard starting position, and white's playing the fianchetto version of this whole opening, but, you know, with the white pieces. Now knight c6 from Alireza. So this is a standard idea. You want to support e5 later, you pressure d4 here as well. Now if white kicks that knight immediately, it gets quite tactical with the knight coming to a5. You instantly hit this pawn, it can be defended with b3, and this is the main line. You've weakened the diagonal by defending the pawn, but the knight's out on the rim, so white's a bit better with the space advantage, but it can get very, very tactical in the long run. So Magnus doesn't kick on, he just plays castles here. Now Alireza strikes with e5, and Magnus goes for a positional approach to the game here. So if he goes d5, this is the classic King's Indian move. You take the space, this time the knight can come to e7 because the pawn's moved, and now you get a pawn structure like this, and black prepares to go pawn f5, go for those classic attacking ideas. So Magnus doesn't go for that kind of game. Instead he chops on e5. Pawn recaptures, and he's going for something more positional here. He's letting Alireza get the queens off the board if he wants to after this bishop to g5 move, because what he's claiming here is that he has this small edge, and the reason being black's committed this pawn to e5, but white hasn't yet committed their pawn to e4. So this bishop is still alive, still looking down this diagonal, and it just creates this uncomfortable pressure on the black position, which black doesn't have in response. So these are some of the kind of key positional ideas. So Alireza develops with bishop to e6. Magnus now goes queen a4, so he doesn't need asking twice to not exchange the queens. He now wants to bring a rook to the d file. And now Alireza, he slides his queen across. You can also go to c8 there, that's slightly more common, but the idea is the same. You break the pin and you prepare to bring a rook to the d file at the right moment. And so this is why Magnus, he now chops off this knight. Bishop recaptures. Yes, he's given the bishop pair, but again, it's all about this light squared grip. Excuse me. Light squared control. You can see by bringing the knight here, he's opened the eyes of the bishop, and now he's looking to come to e4 and then into c5, and playing b6 is going to be very difficult for black, as we can see. So Alireza drops the bishop back. He anticipates knight to e4. Magnus now brings the rook. He could have already brought the knight to e4 or b3, heading for this square, but he holds off one move, and it's a great kind of waiting move. You know, it's tempting black to now go pawn to f5, that classic King's Indian move, but that would be a mistake here. So for example, the best continuation is this one, which might look strange, giving up the light squared bishop, but the problem is that this is now a tactical liability, so no time for black to take on b2. And after you tuck back, b3, well, black doesn't really have enough compensation for the pawn, and with the knight coming to d5, white stands better. So f5 no good, and there's one more move I want to show you here before I carry on with the game, And it's this knight here, basically. So Alireza brings a rook, whoops, to the d file here. But best is actually knight d8, because this is a problem piece. And when Magnus's knight hits c5, this is a sample continuation similar to the game. Well, now the knight on d8, it protects this bishop. This is key. So black can slowly unravel like this. You could move the bishop, then develop the knight like this. And there's nothing better for white than just to change those ones off. Now black can challenge the d file at the right moment. And obviously white could take this bishop in that position there, but then the knight comes in, and again black's got a nice knight, decent pawn structure. So subtle ideas, but knight d8 was the right move in this position. Alireza brings the rook, very natural, but we'll see the problem with this now. Because Magnus goes knight to b3, he also could have come to e4, same idea, heading for c5. And now after Alireza goes knight to d4, this is a mistake. Because Magnus doesn't chop that knight, he jumps into c5. We had c6 now played to cover this square from these knight jumps. Also, it blunts out this dangerous bishop. You know, there was an attack on that pawn. The b7 pawn was about to be won. But now the problem is pawn to e3. You kick that knight, which is defending the bishop and therefore defending the pawn structure. If this knight's on d8, you don't have this problem. This is key. So now the bishop moved away, the knight didn't move, because the problem, by the way, coming back here, say you come knight f5, the knight's really just got no squares. Well, this is just a horrible pawn structure, huge positional advantage for Magnus, the kind of game he's just going to crush long term. So that's why Alireza, he tries to mix it up tactically, bishop to g4, but now we had captures here. You could already take the rook straight away, but Alireza flicks in this one. The knight moves away. Now he takes the rook. Rook recaptures, but this is really difficult for black. White's got the two minors for the rook. Long-term advantage now. So queen c7 played, activating that queen. Now queen to b3. Puts pressure on this pawn, and it's a great subtle, deep move. Magnus provokes pawn to b6, drops this knight back. Knights are excellent blockaders of passed pawns, but look what he did when the move b6 was played. Well, he weakened that long diagonal. And now it's surprising that Alireza didn't go pawn c5 here, cementing his passed pawn, etc. And white can't take advantage of this kind of tactical stuff right at this moment, but I suspect he didn't do this because he felt it wasn't mixing up the position enough. When you're worse, you generally want to try and mix things up, look for tactical opportunities, confuse your opponent. And this is blitz chess, by the way. I think I mentioned that earlier. So instead, rook a b8 was played. Comes off the diagonal, eyes the queen with the x-ray, but it allows this pawn to c5 move, stops Alireza setting up that connect 4 of pawns. Now this one can be captured, but then queen c4. And this beautiful knight on d3 is blockading the pawn, defending the b2 pawn. Now we had queen a5, Alireza trying to activate, but Magnus hops in with this knight. Eats up that pawn, really big advantage now. The rooks are just struggling to get into the game for Alireza. So bishop f8 was played, hits this knight. b4 from Magnus. Again, look at the amazing job which this knight on d3 does. And here the best move is queen to b5, just to challenge this queen, which has a really strong influence down towards this pawn. But again, it's just a miserable move that you don't want to play when you're worse. So instead, Alireza comes here, mixing things up, but now knight e5, and it's just curtains for this pawn. You can't bring either of the rooks into the game because of this knight. So we had the queen coming here, chopping the pawn. Now Magnus takes with check. King moves and he nudges the queen back with check. Also wants to now clear room for this knight. And after bishop g7, can you find the best way to finish off the game here, the best move to play? So yes, in this position, it is the obvious move of knight f7 check. But the world champion didn't find this strongest continuation. Now the idea is that when the king moves back, this is maybe the slightly trickier bit, can you find the best move from here? So the move to play is queen to e6. Silent but deadly, sets up all of this x-ray stuff. And if you come rook e8, challenging that queen, well then we jump away with the double check. That's the key. the king comes here, we mate, and if it comes here, you've got the classic smothered checkmate. Again, pause if you want to look for it. Really common tactical idea. You give the queen, but then you checkmate like this. The king is boxed in by its own pieces. So these are the ideas going on in the position. Knight f7 was best. But Magnus ducks away like this, and there's still big problems for black, however. This is still a threat with check. This is still a threat to fork all three pieces. So Alireza deals with this one, but then Magnus chops here, hits the queen, then takes the rook. So he's just completely better, of course. Queen e2 was played, desperate last move, hits the undefended rook, but Magnus slides back. And here Alireza resigns. He's a full 2 minor pieces down, completely lost, of course. I hope you enjoyed this brilliant game. If you want to see another classic encounter between these two players, check out the video on screen, and I hope to see you again soon. Thanks for watching.